Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is God's Teeth for Delta Green the Role-Playing Game by Arc Dream Publishing, Part 2. This video will cover the chapter Go Forth and will be split into two parts, with this one covering the setup of the second part of the video. Again, I need to warn you that the content and themes of this chapter are quite frankly disturbing, so just make sure your players are comfortable with what is presented here. I don't give this kind of warning very often, however in this case it doesn't come lightly. Go Forth begins on the 3rd of January 2001 with an Agent Clove tasking the only Delta Green cross-cell agent that she knows with a mission. The mission takes place at an orphanage called Cornucopia House that sits on a hobby farm in Zion, Maryland. Your group should consist of only one actual agent and they are Clove's contact. That agent is tasked with gathering together a group of friendlies to enter the orphanage in the dead of night and kill every single adult there, with Clove telling them that it is a recruitment test. Clove will not tell the agent that she is asking this without the support of A-Cell, or even if they know about it. C-Cell was wiped out by a strange Russian cult called the Skoptsi around a month ago, and Clove is acting out of desperation. The very idea that the people who wiped out her cell are still breathing is something that she can't live with, as well as the children who are at risk being left with them is unthinkable. They have to die. Of course, neither Clove nor the agent are aware in the slightest that they are being manipulated by Bast. When putting together the group, the handler should try and forge one from the days before the programme, as it begins just before the terrible events of 9/11 and ends some 20 years later. With this in mind, set the ages of the characters accordingly. As previously mentioned, one is an agent and the rest are friendlies, though no single person is in charge due to Delta Green not having a command structure that can be enforced on friendlies. After the mission, the survivors will join Delta Green with an equal standing. Through desperation, they form a team and they are by no means the best qualified, however they are the only ones available. The main reason for them gathering as they are is due to proximity. The campaign starts with a single agent who is barely connected to Delta Green. In addition to being an agent who recently lost their cell and seemingly fallen out of the attention of the conspiracy, which is undergoing changes that leave many things forgotten. Either someone should volunteer for the role or they are chosen at random. This single agent is all that remains of D-Cell, which was rebuilt in 1998 after something occurred that overtook other members. That single player should choose a codename that begins with D, as well as creating codenames and personalities of their two dead partners. They start with the damaged veteran option, with the option of having another one of the available options if they wish, in order to represent previous missions that caused the loss of their companions. They are encouraged to name them as well as to provide details on them. As to whether the agent knows D-Cell's history is up to the handler. Their previous leader was Agent Darren, who was sent to prison in 1997 and escaped in 1999, with rumours abound that he led a raid on a US government facility in Puerto Rico and has been underground ever since, though the agent that remains from D-Cell was not involved. Next we move on to a disinformation section on the Skoptsi. The incident that starts God's Teeth's campaign uses a dying cult. There is a sect within the Russian Orthodox Church called the Skoptsi that are devoted to Shub-Niggurath. These cults self-castrate, not to atone for their sins but to try to become immortal, relying on orphans to propagate the cult from generation to generation. This particular arm of the cult lives in an unincorporated community on the eastern shore of Chesapeake Bay. The community's heart is that of the Basilica of Our Virgin Mother, a Russian cathedral with dark secrets beneath it. They usually work jobs like taxi drivers, construction workers and the like, and are helped and guarded by a former Soviet assassin that defected in the 1950s, the 80-year-old Fedor Berezhkov, who remains under CIA protection, with the alias Vasily Karpov, who relies on a former KGB officer, Natalia Chermenenko, and her gang. This is all discussed in Delta Green Countdown and Delta Green the Millennium. Yelena Kalamatiano, a Skoptsi cultist, has helped them survive by maintaining an orphanage, thus providing a constant stream of children, though she has grown distant from the cult. Having been denied immortality by cult leaders, she is seeking salvation by using up the cult's supply of children, something the Skoptsi are unable to prevent as she is a powerful sorcerer and literally knows where all the bodies are buried. Due to the Skoptsi's first encounter with Delta Green, they are laying low and have no idea of Yelena's exposure, maybe even being slightly thankful of her passing as long as it can't lead to them. It mentions that hunting the Skoptsi could even be its own campaign, as in Cornucopia House there is a possible instrument that could lead to them being wiped out. Okay, so back to the agents. So we have a single agent and a group of friendlies. They are linked due to them at one point helping an FBI agent called Gary Hall and his partner Lena Garner, a naval intelligence officer that had retired, having been on the edge of a number of investigations over the years and knowing their real names. The friendlies are to be given this disinformation section. More on them shortly. None of the friendlies have heard of C-Cell, their code names, or even Delta Green. Their exposure to the supernatural is fairly insubstantial, having never lost sound from it or having been harmed. It then goes on to talk about their backstories and bonds. It mentions that glossing over the lives of agents is always a temptation in Delta Green, but in this campaign it stresses that their backgrounds should be fleshed out and discussed, made relatable and distinctive. They should also have some kind of connection to one or two children, even ones that the agent has helped and still feels a sense of responsibility for is fine. So after this we move on to the next disinformation section, Garner and Hall. The friendlies helped the pair of them on a few odd investigations with supernatural influences from 1996, though as explained he never suffered for it. Hall is a 37-year-old, 10-year FBI veteran who works on Baltimore's organised crime. He generally looks into the Gambino family that operate in Maryland, and due to the flexibility of this, he has chosen the chance on occasions to look into some of the more unusual cases. Garner is a 47-year-old retired naval investigative officer and a bit of a cipher. She's friendly without ever giving anything about herself up and a technical consultant on Hall's stranger cases, though they have a deeper history. They were last in touch a few months ago. The current year is 2001. There are no smartphones. In fact, cell phones are not exactly common, with people generally using miniature walkie-talkies with a range of d4 kilometres. Internet is on dial-up and sluggish. Broadband is not common either. People don't usually stream things, but download them, and instead of cell phones, pages are often used. Phone books with white and yellow pages are still handy, and hotels use keys instead of cards. Business having a website is almost a novelty, and maps are on paper. People actually call and speak to people to find things out. Information's hard to get hold of and rarely correlated. Mankind generally lives in a blissful island of ignorance. So, onto the background of the mission. Agent Clove is actually a criminologist called Dr. Marie Noella, who is contracted as an FBI advisor with a focus on international sex trafficking that funds global terror. She was initially consulted in the early 90s with regard to the Italian mafia. However, her recruiter, Gary Hall, has set it up as a ruse to test her as a possible Delta Green member. In 1995, she was approached with her subsequent consultations used as a cover for C-Cell operations. They were active in the late 90s and other members were recruited, and when one of them, Agent Cyrus, was suspected of being too broken to continue, she acted in support as Agent Clove. The head of C-Cell, Agent Charlie, became the cell's point of contact, channeling operations to them without actually being present. Noella managed to obtain some friendlies among staff at small airports, and she learned that a small Delaware airfield, Smyrna Airport, had flights chartered by Natalia Chermenenko, a known Russian mafia member who was wanted by Interpol. Friendly baggage handlers noticed her meeting an elderly man called Vasily Karpov and giving him a box. With her interest heightened, she obtained permission from A-Cell to surveil her and Karpov with the hope of recovering valuable Cambodian unnatural artefacts that were being smuggled in. On January 14, 2001, following Karpov having a meeting at the hangar, he was tracked to Coachman Taxi Garage in Perry Point, Maryland. Agent Clyde thought that it was time to bring him in for interrogation and entered the garage with another of C-Cell's agents, Agent Cerise. Clove hung around outside. Only Karpov was seen entering the garage, and what occurred inside is still a mystery. There were gunshots, and by the time Noella had reacted, the garage was on fire. Clyde staggered to the door with gunshot wounds, passed Noella a black book and a half-burned cartoon cat folder, and said, "Run." He then wandered back into the smoke, firing his gun, and Clove got away. Hall vanishing was noticed by the FBI, however, a faulty gas pump was deemed to have caused the fire. A collapsed roof buried the bodies in concrete, and charred wreckage never to be discovered. Noella, of course, panicked. She couldn't contact anyone in A or C-Cell. It seemed like her ability to reach out to them had vanished. She only had one other agent who was unknown to her to approach in an emergency, and this is the lone player's agent. Her intention is to trick the agent into carrying out her revenge without any approval from A-Cell, and is leaving the country to live in China, working at Xiamen University. Her relationship with her husband has remained okay, despite her limited exposure to the unnatural. She plans to get as far away from Cornucopia House as possible. We have another disinformation box out called The Agent of D-Cell. Clove sent her meeting request via encrypted email, and this agent is the only survivor of D-Cell. That agent already knows Agent Charlie and Ernie from C and E-Cell by their code names and can reach them via encrypted mail. They don't know the identities of any of them. Clove is unknown to the agent and they have never worked together. The agent only knows that Delta Green's communications are being used. Cell leaders are meant to be the ones who arrange meetings in person, so they can assume that Clover's the leader. Delta Green have a rule that cells adjacent to each other in the alphabet are not to meet, which makes it strange. Charlie and Ernie do not respond to any communications. This is meant to make the agents slightly uncomfortable. Okay, so now we move on to the beginning of the involvement of the players, the meet. The D-Cell agent is to meet at a gas station off Interstate 96 in Maryland at 2 a.m. on Saturday the 3rd of February 2001. They were alerted by a hidden beeper that was locked in a closet that indicated it was a message from Delta Green. There's snow on the ground and 2 cars are in the parking lot, a 1990 Toyota Corolla and a 1995 Honda Civic. If the VIN is investigated, it will show that it is owned by a used car dealer in Baltimore called Slim's Sedans and recently sold for $5,000 cash, with paperwork filed incorrectly. If spoken to, Slim says that he fired the employee for the negligence. Who bought the car is an unknown. Should the agent arrive early, they will see Clover arrive in the Civic, go inside and slip the attendant $20 and then head to the meeting room in silence. If the agent follows or confronts the agent, the meeting still goes the same way. As they enter, the attendant nods and indicates to the small kitchen area, which is dark apart from the light emitted from security monitors. If the lights are switched on, a middle-aged black woman who is barely 5 foot tall is stood there as roaches scatter from the light. She looks sleep-deprived but sharp. In front of her are a pistol, a manila folder, and the cartoon cat folder. Any attempt to record the conversation is spoiled by the squeaking of the station's hot dog machine rollers. There's a smell of burned meat in the air. We have many box outs throughout this campaign that are marked synchronicity. These are things that are noticeable that hint at what is going on. Here there is a large cardboard pizza advert with a young girl's face, her mouth tilted back to bite into a slice. It's been vandalised. The eyes are blacked out and a stitched scar has been added to the cheek with 2 white written across her enormous teeth. Each slice of pepperoni pizza has the word meat in all capitals written on it. Clover will tell them that A-Cell tasked her with contacting the agent and that they have been given a list of friendlies to vet for the group, a test of loyalty. Their names are in the manila folder. She tells them that there is a conference room in the Holiday Inn Express in Sykesville for tomorrow morning, supposedly a criminology lecture under the cover of training law enforcement on domestic abuse. This is where they're to be briefed. She tells them that intel has indicated that a children's residential farm near Zion, Maryland is a threat. It's called Cornucopia House. It must be neutralised while vetting of the friendlies is performed. She tells the agent to obtain unregistered firearms, mask up and visit Cornucopia House at night once the kids are sleeping. Every adult is to be killed. Do not let them speak. The bodies and evidence to be disposed of and Clover is to be contacted via a burner phone. The friendlies are to be told whatever it takes to get them to help. If there's any doubt, show them the contents of the cartoon cat folder. This will bring them around. Friendlies are not to call for help or gain permission from their day jobs. Finally, it needs to be done quickly as kids are being harmed and killed right now. The agent will no doubt have questions. If they ask why there is the break from protocol in the cross-cell contact, she will tell them that it is a fluid situation above their pay grade. If humans is used, the agent can determine on a failure she's telling the truth about the danger, whereas a success shows that she's lying via omission but does believe in the danger. If they ask what situation, she will tell them that if they don't know, they aren't meant to. Humans will, on a failure, show she honestly believes in danger. However, on a success, it's clear she doesn't know what the threat is. If they point out that the cell is just them, she will say that they were all that was available and to use the friendlies. If it is a success, they are the new cell. If bureaucracy plus 20% is rolled, on failure it's clear that none of this makes any sense. Testing friendlies on such an important mission is not done. On a success, the agent realises that the friendlies were chosen without the importance of the situation being considered. If Clover is asked where she will be, she tells them that she'll be out the country on her own mission, and mention that they need to call and tell her how it ends. If psychotherapy at plus 20% or humans is rolled, a failure indicates that this work demoralises her, looking like she would prefer field work over being a messenger. A success sees the sorrow in her voice as she says a mission of my own. Should they ask what the targets did that means they need to die, she will say they did enough and push the cartoon cat folder toward the agent. No roll is needed here, she is 100% sincere. If asked why they do not let them speak, she says that if they want to stay alive, that is what they need to do. If psychotherapy at plus 20% or humans is rolled, failure will indicate that she knows enough to know nobody wants to understand more. Success indicates that she doesn't know what they are capable of, but that she's seen operations turn sour. If they ask how they get the friendlies on board, she tells them to do whatever it takes, and then there's always the cat folder. saying if that doesn't motivate them, nothing will. She absolutely means this. If asked how long they have, she will say that it needs to happen now. The targets are dangerous and they suspect an incoming investigation. It needs to be dealt with before a social worker dies. If psychotherapy at plus 20% or humans is rolled, a failure indicates she is quite certain of this. A success indicates that she believes that this needs to happen quickly, though as to whether they are expecting trouble, she's not sure. Should the agent ask if they have photos and background information on their targets to track them, she will tell them that no, they don't, but that intelligence puts a small number of them at this site. And finally, if asked what needs to be done with the kids, she will tell them that they shouldn't see the agents and friendlies enough to identify them, but to call her when it's done and that they can figure it out. Next, we move to the Manila folder. This contains the names and contact information for the friendlies put together by Clove from Hall's notes. It includes email printouts and cutouts that Clove used to arrange the 3rd of February 2001 meeting at 10 AM at the Holiday Inn Express. It contains reasons that were put in there for them to be there, with anyone from law enforcement being told that they have to go, and others stating that they did work for Hall and Garner, and that it is cover for a clandestine meeting. It can be quite easily determined using criminology or bureaucracy that this is terrible operational security, and that the people listed clearly have nothing to do with each other, with the criteria for selection being indeterminable or even questionable. There's a MapQuest printout of Cornucopia House and surrounds, and EIN and 501c3 tax forms for a non-profit called Families Without Frontiers. They own and operate Cornucopia House. Lastly, there is an old Nokia cell phone with 20 minutes of call time and one number in the contacts. The agent can correctly presume that this is Clove's burner. Then, we move to the cartoon cat folder. It's pink and has specks of blood and what looks like oil on it and smells of gasoline. It has a cartoon Japanese cat on the cover. Looking inside, it removes any doubt whatsoever about what will motivate them. Clove instructs the agents to keep the folder at least until after the meeting with the friendlies, in case they need to be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt. The agent doesn't actually perceive the contents, but experience them in an almost disembodied sense. The first viewing by the agent costs 1 or D4 san due to the consuming sorrow they see. It leaves them with no doubt whatsoever that the adults of Cornucopia House have to die. The second viewing makes them get the gist of physical contents, with any lingering glances causing them to be repelled and disgust. Another 1 or D4 san loss through violence. They notice that they are Polaroid photos, dirty and worn from handling. There are men, women, children and things, all combining in horrific ways. It looks like they were taken in a wood or at a farm. There is a picture with a cottage in the distance. Closer inspection reveals Cornucopia House on it. It then goes on to describing the folder, stating that the contents should never be described. This is sanity-shredding abuse of children, and it serves as motivation for what is to follow. Everything about this is wrong. Everyone should be uncomfortable. This folder is the reason why they will do what they have to do. If the photos are closely studied, a further 1 or D4 san is lost due to helplessness. Those with computer science or SIGINT are 40% plus, and those with art, photography at 20% plus can state that these photos are not fake. The multiple angles match up, the lighting is consistent, adult faces are carefully avoided, and they seem to be both young and old men and women. Some tattoos are visible and look to be the kind from Russian prisons, and almost like Eastern Orthodox symbols. The adults seem to have a thing about being castrated, which is not common even in the most extreme gulags, and both men and women show these scars. Those with history at 80% plus or occult at 60% plus can make a roll at minus 20% and can decide that the genital mutilation and symbols are part of the legend surrounding a Russian Orthodox splinter sect from the 18th century called the Skoptsi, who preached holy castration and sexual mutilation. More can be found out about them online. Other legends speak of them gaining power from devils. This could be investigated further. So now we move to the Sykesville seminar. The team will meet for the first time at the Holiday Inn Express at the pre-mentioned date and time. The room is listed as Domestic Abuse Intervention and Response Professional Development Seminar 2B, listed in this way by Clove in order to put people off scrutinising it. The room is catered with bagels, coffee and a projector running a PowerPoint on the limitations of public response to domestic violence. It was all registered under the name Cecilia Sands, a false identity. This can be investigated further. The friendlies should arrive before the agents and can discuss whatever they want. Law enforcement people may think the meeting is genuine, though those brought there falsely could mention whatever they imagine Delta Green to be, maybe even discussing their interactions with the group, however limited, though as friendlies they really shouldn't. It has a section here for if the agents become too paranoid or scared to attend, with a few possibilities mentioned as to what to do, adapt and improvise. The agent should arrive probably tired and shaken after meeting Clove, and now it is the turn of the friendlies. This should be played out with the agent doing whatever it takes to get them on board. If they look like they will leave, then the CAF folder is the last resort. This will always work. The friendly, after viewing the content, should be told that they've changed their mind and must complete the mission. We have another synchronicity box out here. The PowerPoint presentation entitled A Call for Peace displays photos of domestic abuse from the early 1990s and will eventually freeze on a slide called Red Thoughts, with some bullet points given by those who commit domestic violence and how frequently they are used. We then move on to reactions to the folder. If the briefing gets to the point where the content of the folder is shown, then each friendly has a unique reaction. A D10 is rolled on this table, and these reactions should be printed out and given to the player to see how their brain reacts. This should be used to influence their decision making going forth. There are 10 of them which range from outrage, sorrow, revenge, humour, precision, purpose, acceptance, isolation, denial and excess. Needless to say, the content of the CAF folder affects each friendly on a deeply profound level. After this we move on to chipping the teeth. It states that during the event of Go Forth, all of the friendlies should be isolated and physically scarred, with the finale making them realise that some terror from beyond has marked them. They should each be marked before entering the guest bedroom of Cornucopia House, and it's always an animal or remains of one that causes it. They should be alone with an animal that behaves strangely and be harmed in some manner, losing at least 1 hit point. The player should describe the mark. The idea is to make the agents come to the realisation that their choices are part of some grand plan. The animal that scars them should be friendly and submissive before the attack, with very unlikely ones costing 0 or 1 sand from the unnatural. It gives some examples here with the circumstances and possibilities. There is an in-the-field box out here called Fleeing Fate. After the chipping, agents may take active measures to avoid animals, though the handler should ensure this happens, and the more extreme that they go in order to avoid contact, then the more improbable and sand-damaging the situation will be. After this, we move on to investigations. With Clove pointing out the urgency of this mission, the agents may look to find out why before how. This gives them time and opportunity for the handler to chip the teeth and allow the agents to stretch the legs of their characters before the extremities of Cornucopia House. They should, however, be reminded of the simple truth that while they investigate, the events from the cartoon CAF folder are happening at Cornucopia House. Firstly, we look at Families Without Frontiers. Clove managed to pull some basics about them, that is, in the Manila folder, but more can be gleaned. If a government database can be accessed and an accounting roll of 30% is rolled with a plus 20% bonus, then they can find an inconclusive audit from the 80s which details the adoption, acculturation and placement of Eastern European orphans in the US. It's noted as being a hobby dairy farm, with 150 acres of it being sold in the year 2000 to Maryland for a new state prison. It was founded and still run by Yelena Calamatiano and is the only employee of Families Without Frontiers, though she almost certainly has others there due to the nature of running a hobby dairy farm and orphanage. Further digging into the accounting can find more. It's supported almost completely by local businesses, and almost all of them being run by Russian immigrants, or even descendants that live in an unincorporated part of Cecil County, giving donations for decades, sometimes at over 50% of their profit. Whenever a sponsor folds, another company pops up owned by the same people. The donations have shrunk over the years, and Families Without Frontiers looks to be in financial trouble, with flights from Eastern Europe stopping in 1997, causing them to do adopting locally. If the agents decide to look at the folder itself for evidence, then information can be gathered. There are 2 sets of fingerprints on it that match some in the FBI database, those of FBI agent Gary Hall and Vasily Karpov, a disabled 80-year-old. Karpov was born in 1921 in New York from immigrants and joined the Navy in 1942 on the cruise at Astoria, suffering a severe back injury when it was sunk in 1942. He lives on a Navy disability pension and has lived in a number of places in the US. He can be investigated after the events of Go Forth. The blood is from multiple male and females. DNA strand identification will take months, and if done locally, no matches are found. If done via the FBI labs and a bureaucracy test is passed, then one match is FBI Special Agent Gary Hall. The residue on the folder is from a black organic fluid that is fire damage beyond recognition. Should a critical forensics or normal medicine or relevant science scale be rolled, then it is revealed that the cells are abnormal due to 2 factors. Firstly, they are cancerous, and secondly, the cells are of many different types: marrow, semen and muscle cells, all tumorous. This cancerous uniformity is difficult to explain. Further investigation shows that there are dead and cancerous animal cells mixed in with the human ones. This causes a sand check as they try to come to terms with how this may have happened. If the agents look at tracing the folder, then they can use criminology at 60% or higher to determine that they could look for unusual fires within a few days of the meeting with Clove. After sifting through the less obvious and talking with local marshals using various skills, they can find an unusual taxi garage fire. It happened at the Coachman Taxi Garage in Perry Point, Maryland, near Chesapeake Bay. Investigators found more accelerant than normal and suspected arson. Patients in the local Veteran Affairs Medical Centre complained of hearing fireworks, though it was not investigated due to blowback from local residents. Agents can discover that Coachman is a donor to Families Without Frontiers, spending a lot of their income supporting it. The agents can physically dig out the wreckage of the taxi garage using construction equipment, though this would draw local attention. If this is done, they can find the bodies of Gary Hall, Lena Garner, and 5 others who could be Russian mobsters due to the tattoos, as well as a number of burned guns, and the huge problem of what to do next. Should the agents want to investigate Clove, this is not exactly difficult. However, they will eventually reach some dead points. Contacting Delta Green reveals nothing, with the silence being deafening. Should anybody with criminology at 70% plus make a roll with a minus 20% penalty, she can be quickly identified by journal photos from her academic work. Also, searching FBI databases with criminology at 50% plus finds her photograph. A simple method would be to follow her until she buys something, then convince the clerk to show her the receipt. Her financial records could then be unearthed with an accounting test. There's nothing in her background that indicates affiliation with Delta Green. She's married to Charles Noella and has a 4-year-old son called Timothy living in Bethesda, Maryland, as he teaches at Wilmington University. The morning following the meeting, she moves to China. This cannot be stopped and they cannot catch up with her. It points out that if an agent rolls outstandingly well, tailing Noella, an animal runs out in front of their car, forcing it off the road, throwing itself deliberately in their path, which is again a chance to scar the agent. Bast clearly has other plans. If they book a flight to China, the jet is hit by bird strike, forcing it to land. As they disembark, gulls will circle overhead, cawing, which is another chance to scar them. If they actually manage to make it all the way to China, the animals stopping them start defying explanation, causing sand loss. If they look into Gary Hall and Lena Garner, they can find out that Hall has not been to work since the 13th of January 2001, having been reported missing by his wife on the 17th of January. If she is interviewed, she will say that he suffers from PTSD and mood swings, often vanishing for days or weeks at a minute's notice, but always tells her beforehand. Lena Garner is another story. There is very little they can find out about her other than that she was 47, and if contacted, the Office of Naval Intelligence say nobody of that name has ever worked there. There's nothing in the public record. She's essentially a ghost. Should they decide to investigate the finances of Cornucopia House, an in-times fire roll is made with success indicating that their finances are odd. It seems like they buy far too many cows for the amount of milk they produce, with livestock making up the majority of their finances. Further digging indicates that some of the breeds are from non-milk producing stock and they report no slaughter earnings. Additionally, a successful bureaucracy roll can find land survey records and a basic map. Then there is the Department of Human Services, the agency that all adoption and juvenile residential facilities in Maryland report to. They track the placement of children, but due to budgeting and staffing issues, follow-ups are usually outsourced. A lot of these are accredited for medical institutions, though the lowest bidder is usually the one insurance companies go for. This has led to the likes of teen boot camps, evangelical conversion therapy, and juvenile detention centres, though this is normal throughout the US in 2001. This means that, though the adoptions by Families Without Frontiers will have records, they may not reflect what is going on. We have another synchronicity box out here. Every child wants a pet. In the lobby of the Maryland DHS, there is a poster depicting a boy and a puppy cowering below a picture of a cat spitting giant green bacteria on them. More about this will be revealed in the next video. If the agents try to delve into the records of Families Without Frontiers, there are a number of large obstacles in their way. Firstly, adoption records are one of the most legally binding documents provided under federal law, and they are sealed under Maryland state law. It takes a judge passing down a warrant with good cause to have them opened, or failing that, the signed consent of all parties, that being the agency, adoptive parents, birth parents and the child themselves. Should they visit the Maryland DHS, a law or bureaucracy role is needed to see the legal documents that seal the records. Only those with law enforcement backgrounds can pull rank in this way. Normal citizens are told that they can neither confirm nor deny the adopted children, and then they'll be asked to leave. In the documents, the adoption agency is the only party referred to by name, with everyone else being assigned a case number. It can be discovered that Families Without Frontiers have taken further steps to protect the records, and due to the birth parents being from other countries, their consent is not required, with every instance of Families Without Frontiers having rejected this waiver, meaning the records cannot be unsealed without a court order, which makes them incredibly difficult for the agents to access. A warrant can be forged with a successful law roll if they know the name of at least one child, though legal blowback is a danger. Strangely, the easiest way to gain access is to break into the office archives, though it is a government building with alarms and CCTV. If they're successful, a search roll will reveal a terrible clue. Families Without Frontiers appears to be laundering the origin of the children in their care. All are noted as living in the Moscow of Chesapeake on eastern Chesapeake Bay. It notes that in recent years, those that have adopted children from Cornucopia House have given their own children to the agency. Around 30 families seem to be trading their children like possessions. Until 1995, Families Without Frontiers provided information on the birth records of the immigrant children as per the law. However, after that, there was an increase in the issuing of delayed certificates of birth without any indication of citizenship, something that is usually done for US citizens from religious communities such as the Amish. The indication here is that the children were born in isolated communities and never given social security numbers. Either that or Families Without Frontiers are stealing children and getting them new documentation. It's worth pointing out that Maryland DHS do have social workers that visit adoption placements, though are often run ragged with all the reports of child abuse across the state. This results in a small amount of underpaid and overworked people with an extremely high turnover. And on top of that, there is no law enforcement arm of Maryland DHS, so the best social workers can do is to report any abuse they find and hope that it's investigated, even though there is no legal recourse. Should the persuade skill be used on an admin assistant, they can find out that the Families Without Frontiers case was considered cursed, with the last social worker assigned to it developing Alzheimer's and the one before taking their own life, and the one before that quitting after a month. It's currently assigned to Kerry Houghton, who's been working on it for around 3 years. She's in an office when the agents arrive and looks older than her 25 years. Sunken-eyed, with limp hair, she has nightmares of helpless abused children trapped in filthy rooms. Her office is a mess of stacked folders, and she's actually happy to chat to anybody with a good explanation of their interest in what she does. Chatting with her can reveal a fair bit. A successful human role will show that every time Families Without Frontiers are mentioned, she looks stressed out, and if this is picked up on by the agents and explored, she will reveal that it is not her case and can't legally reveal anything, though she can tell them that she can put them in touch with the person who is in charge of it. She will go to another door in the office and ask the person if they are handling case number 121, to be told, "I thought that was your case." Any agent with psychotherapy at 30+% who makes a roll at a plus 20% can detect mania from Houghton, as everyone in the office thinks it is her case. A successful persuade roll can convince her to check her records on Families Without Frontiers to tell them what she sees, though if they press her, she will break confidentiality through desperation and will ask the agents to leave, saying she feels ill, going home and causing a ruckus in the office. The file can easily be stolen during the commotion. Her reviews over the last 3 years have given it a 3 out of 4 score, and though visits are sporadic, she says that it is sanitary, the children do acceptable chores and understand what farm life is about, seeming happy and playing while also being educated. She mentions that the children love their babushka and her homemade cookies are made mention of. Strangely, every report since 1982 says the exact same statement, just in different handwriting. The next visit is not even on the schedule. There's another in the field box out which describes what happens if the agents show Houghton the cartoon cat folder. Obviously this is a terrible idea, but terrible ideas are sometimes what Delta Green are about. She will have a deep sense of déjà vu about the atrocities depicted within, but cannot recall why she never reported it and why she can't remember. Should the agents follow her home, she will call the police if pressed, as she is too upset to let them in. If they manage to gain access to her apartment when she is not there, it's a nightmare of hoarders' junk. Bins are overflowing, sinks are full of dishes, the smell is terrible, and she even has a dead cat that has been left where it died. A search roll at -20% or having the skill at 70% plus finds her diaries. In them she details the horrific conditions of Cornucopia House, with later entries depicting her worrying about her failure to remember the entries or even visiting. Eventually her entries begin to be the same thing day after day, month after month. The text from the Families Without Frontiers home visit. Okay, so now we move on to preparation. Now obviously the main priority with any operation is to not get caught, with those who work in law enforcement understanding that items brought to murder scenes need to be discarded in a secure manner afterwards, meaning cars, weapons, and having a clear plan for getting in and out. The longer the time spent on preparation, the worse their sense of helplessness gets, with a sand test every 24 hours from the knowledge that the children of Cornucopia House are in danger. The weather at that time of year in Maryland in 2001 was freezing at night to very cold by day, with the 3rd and 4th being especially cold. The sun rises at 7 a.m. and sets around 5:30 p.m, with a waxing gibbous moon on February the 3rd and a full on February the 8th. Should the agents ask locals about Cornucopia House, it is worth reminding them that these are potential witnesses. Those in nearby residential farms don't know much. The front gate is always closed and nobody seems to ever go there. Some locals think it is sad that the place doesn't hold tours so that the orphans get to meet other children and meet potential parents. Some local kids get access to the nearby woods, however, they never stay long, get very far, or have anything to report. Similarly, service workers take the utility road and have never reported seeing anything interesting. Locals are never hired, with them bringing in people from outside the area. The more the agents speak to locals, the clearer their memories when the police come calling. The next section is called Planning a Murder. Clovis has recruited the characters in order to plan murders, and their skills can aid them. Those of the likes of law, firearms, or criminology of 40% or better know that a weapon should be untraceable, and that if it can be proved you owned a gun, it can be traced back to you and can result in you being convicted, even without physical evidence. A mystery gun devoid of DNA and the like is likely going to lead to a dead end, with the worst case being forensic evidence putting you at the scene, with the best option being get rid of the weapon you never actually owned. In Maryland's case, it's likely a private purchase using fake credentials, stealing a weapon, or falsifying transaction details at a gun show. The ammunition should be bought by a different person, and the weapon should be handled as little as possible, and then only with gloves, with tape around points of contact so that it can be removed afterwards to make evidence even more difficult to find. Used weapons should be destroyed or hidden somewhere that nobody will ever find them. Any agent with at least 10% in forensics or 20% in criminology knows that criminals usually quarantine the scene. Everything should be bought with cash for the only purpose of being used in the crime across a wide time span and geographic area. Masks, gloves, hairnets and long-sleeve clothing should be worn and burned at a separate location. Phones and electronics should be destroyed, though left behind while the crime is committed. Missing persons cases with the longest reporting gap before turning into murder investigations are better. Bloodstains should be bleached or obscured and dead bodies removed, with the preference being to sink it in a body of water rather than burying it. If this is not possible, they should be burned at the scene. Cars should, in an ideal world, be stolen and unreported, and they should be burned or sunk at a different location. It mentions that perfect crimes only have victims and no witnesses, and bystanders should see nothing identifiable. No name should be used, along with no accents or diction. In fact, silence is, in this case, golden. Organising all of this requires tactical and logical awareness. Navigation rolls should be made to find local remote locations, and those with military science of 40% plus can make these optimal plans. We then move on to armaments. The agents are free to use any armaments they wish, though they should be prepared to answer for their loss. It gives us a few options. Firstly, there are gun shops. Maryland law requires that a permit is shown and has a 7-day waiting period, alongside background and police checks for handguns and a few other firearms, though almost all rifles and shotguns need an instant FBI check over the phone. If they pass this test, they can leave the store with the weapon there and then. Ideally, a sketchy shop with no CCTV, or a pawn shop that doesn't bother with paperwork. These can be found with criminology rolls. It suggests that a fumble could be an AFT sting, with the consequences up to the handler. They be then switched to personal sale. It details a Maryland firearms collector called Leon Chapman, who the AFT have been investigating for a while, without any charges sticking. He owns a number of pawn shops and gun shops, and has pretty much every gun licence available, enough to justify his historic arsenal. He adopted eBay early and sells gun parts and accessories, and lives in a gaudy mansion outside Baltimore. His decor is tacky, and his basement is multitudes of gun safes. He's armed at all times with a Sig Sauer. His home is decorated with walls of Nazi, libertarian and misogynistic stylings, and it could be threatened with hints of investigation and prosecution. Should badges be produced with the promise that they will leave him alone, he will give them a firearm or two and never reports the incident, having an understanding that police corruption is a thing. Should they threaten him without badges, he will play along, and then call some dangerous biker friends of his who look into the agents with the idea of robbing or murdering them. Buying guns from Chapman requires only the lightest of deception. He will get them to fill out background forms but not check them, believing it is their God-given right to use their property how they want. They need to make a firearms roll in order to prove their knowledge, and this gets them the weapon that they want. Essentially any weapon not marked restricted in the agent's handbook. A failure means one of the following: either number 1, they paid way too much and it cost them one from a bond as the expense is hard to explain away, or 2, Chapman convinces them to buy something wildly impractical such as a crossbow, a spear gun, a claymore, or the like. A fumble causes both. Another alternative is a gun show, and as chance would have it, there is one being held at the Rosaryville Community Centre. Of course, the falsification of transaction records is a federal crime, and CCTV recording is a certainty, though weapons that are bought there and not connected to crimes have little chance of discovery. Agents purchasing guns should make a firearms roll to estimate the quality of what they buy, and should they want to test convincingly forged or stolen documents, a criminology, law or bureaucracy roll needs to be made. A failure means that the sale is refused, whereas a fumble could mean the involvement of law enforcement. We have another synchronicity box out here that one of the firearms bought from Leon Chapman has been personalised by an ex-owner with "Bring Only Death" etched on the barrel. There is another synchronicity moment at the gun show. There are other booths dedicated to hunting and fishing, and in one of them there is a wiry old man selling exotic jerky from Tupperware tubs. There's a banner that says Apex Predator Meats in red paint, and the man shouts at passers-by, asking if they are truly apex predators and if they have ever feasted at the top of the food chain. It ranges from normal jerky to the likes of wolverine, elephant, lion, and some protected species. It can be used to chip one of the teeth, as explained earlier. Another option open to agents is that of stealing weapons, though this is risky. If they get arrested, it's game over. They could prowl parking lots looking for NRA stickers and break into them looking for guns, though the risk there is obvious. If they manage to covertly do so, roll a d6 and refer to this list. If they try to steal from shops, they need to pass a stealth roll and then a SIGINT or craft electronics to get past CCTV and alarms. A fumble alerts authorities. Another option is an evidence locker. This requires a law or bureaucracy to formulate a legitimate excuse for them being added to the chain of custody. A stealth roll is then needed to take them from the premises and then bring them back unnoticed. If they're successful, they may frame others for the crime. Failure means suspension and internal investigation. We have another synchronicity roll for burglaries. In the event of a home invasion, have the owner keep a ball python that has escaped its terrarium and roams free. This could be a good chipping the teeth exercise, even being passive at first. If they burgle a retail store, they should see a banner in the firearms section proudly proclaiming "The hunt begins," and in the evidence room a failure means they are seen by a police officer or federal agent on duty, though rather than causing them trouble, they help. The agent knows this person to be a bad egg who is always accused or suspected of abuse, and later they should involve the agent in far worse crimes than stealing a gun. If they want to steal from a person's home, they would need to make a criminology roll to avoid being seen or setting off alarms, though points out that this should be rolled in secret, with a failure or a fumble bringing a guard dog, triggering a silent alarm, or even coming face to face with the resident. If they get inside, they can try a search roll every 10 minutes with extra people adding bonuses. If they succeed, a luck roll is made. Failure means no guns. A fumble means neighbours come to investigate. On a critical, they find 2d6 guns, and keepers can choose to roll on this table here, which also includes illegal weaponry. Lastly, we have transportation. A statistic it gives is that in the year 2000, 30,000 vehicles were stolen in Maryland. Those with criminology of 30% plus can pinpoint a neighbourhood where a car being stolen is unlikely to be reported, which they can then head to in order to steal a vehicle. Failing that skill can cause the likes of car alarms, police and even bystanders to be present. A drive of 50% means they know how to hotwire a car, as well as rolling heavy machinery or a science or craft skill that applies. They can change the license plates with another car, however, should they get pulled over, they run the risk of their deception being discovered. The final piece of synchronicity is this section for if they are stealing a car. A murder of crows will be seen silently circling a dead possum, not moving if cars approach. If an agent investigates, they take flight, later landing in a circle with the agent that disturbed them at this centre. Okay, that concludes part 1 of Go Forth. Part 2 will cover the agents tackling the horrors of Cornucopia House.